Hey, peace fam. It's your brother Rod Tahuti, and I'm coming at you with a presentation I sort of put together based upon watching the 2017 movie or rendition of Beauty and the Beast. We all know it's a sequel to the 1991 Disney movie. And as a kid, when watching movies like this, you sort of look at it for entertainment and really don't perceive or draw out the actual meanings or the symbols and messages these types of films convey. And I know you're sitting here like, is this guy really thinking that a Disney movie is really putting forth some type of true meaning or message? But those of us that expose ourselves to the mysteries, we kind of understand that these meanings and symbols and signs are kind of placed in all sorts of places based on the people who originally wrote the actual story that later on became a film. Whether these people were involved in esotericism themselves or any type of mystery systems, they kind of put that knowledge into their writings. So just based on me watching the film, I kind of put together a lot of conclusions that I wanted to present to you all today. And of course, this is going to be called Beauty and the Beast and Esotericism. So let's go. Okay, fam. So before I actually get into the meat of this presentation, I wanted to kind of define what esotericism is for those who may not be involved in it on a regular basis. And this will kind of help the rest of the presentation transition more smoothly. So esotericism is intended for or understood by only a few people who have special knowledge. Literary readings can sometimes seem esoteric, but we are trying to make them more attractive to more people, which was kind of an example in Cambridge Online Dictionary. And like I said earlier, a lot of writings, have these messages hidden within them. So literary works are a relative part of human experiences, civilizations, and evolution. And by reading or better analyzing a masterpiece, such as Beauty and the Beast, one widens their scope and knowledge about people in terms of their thoughts, their way of looking at different issues, their experiences, and their beliefs in general. So some examples of literary works which are imaginative or creative writing, but they actually possess esoteric knowledge. One is the Holy Bible. What most of us don't realize is that the Bible, not in its entirety, but a major part of it, is imaginative or creative writing, whether it is stories that were adopted from prior cultures or prior belief systems. The stories that compile the Bible are events that actually did not happen historically. What the stories are put in there for is to convey a deeper meaning, or they were written in such a way to kind of have those initiated into the systems be able to interpret the knowledge that was hidden or that was kept secret, from the majority or functioning of the religion. So most of us have kind of, throughout history, kind of lost the meaning of those stories and kind of took them as factual and historical when they were only meant to have some underlying meaning in order for one's soul to evolve. Another example is the Kabbalah, which is also known as, writings of Jewish mysticism. So, the Jews or Hebrews, they did have another form of writings, that weren't presented to the masses in general, and they were meant to speak about the soul, the spirit, deeper understandings of things, that most people weren't ready for. The Book of Enoch is another example. Whether or not Enoch, there was an actual person named Enoch who went through those events, we can kind of take those as not actual, events that happen, but those that symbolize, some type of, forthcoming or, some type of symbolism that we've kind of lost meaning of, over time. And the last example is, certain types of Kemetic literature, or a majority of your Kemetic literature, such as the Hermetic texts, are esoteric in nature. They don't really involve, gods doing certain things, or actual events going on. They're meant to convey a message or keep something that's hidden, because if Egypt was known for anything, it was known for its mystery schools and mystery systems. The priests kept the knowledge, the actual deeper knowledge of things and about the gods and spiritual aspects of life. They kept that secret from the masses and kind of only allowed those that were initiated to have access to that knowledge. So that's kind of a brief description of esotericism, and I hope that clarifies your understanding of that. So, being a historical person, I love to study history and try to determine the um, result of things, why things happen, what's the significance of an event. And in this specific case, I wanted to kind of research the history of Beauty and the Beast, kind of determine if the 1991 film was just a movie that Disney came up with and just put out there, or was it based on anything earlier that was written. And what I kind of found out was interesting, and that was that in 1740, and I apologize, my French dialect is about to be shown to be kind of bad, but it was originally written by Madame Gabrielle Susanna de Villeneuve, who was born in 1695 and died in 1755. She was in Paris, France, which is interesting because the character Belle is actually from that location. And her story was originally called La Belle et le Beau, which she wrote in 1740. So basically my purpose of, getting into the author and, how the story came about was to try to see if I could make any correlation between the esoteric material I kind of took from the movie, and see if I could base it on any type of factual, event or circumstance, that happened with the writer or anyone involved, in the story. So I did kind of piece together a few things. And even though Madame Gabrielle had been married once, after she divorced from that individual, she cohabited and acted as a literary assistant for an individual named Prosper Joyat de Crébillon. And this was from 1730 until her death. And Prosper Joyat, what was a well-known playwright, tragedy playwright, and a poet, during that time. So she kind of was with him for about 20 some odd years. And what I found out was that he actually was educated, as a Jesuit. And when you research the Jesuits, you kind of see that, the symbolisms they have and the belief system they have, even though they claim that it stems from a Catholic origin, it kind of incorporates a lot of prior pagan worship, as far as sun worship and, that whole mystery school, pursuit of the soul purpose kind of criteria. And what Jesuits practice is called Ignatian Spirituality, meaning to conquer oneself and to regulate one's life in such a way that no decision is made under the influence of any inordinate attachment. So when you kind of decipher that, it's kind of similar to the Egyptian, then later Greek, as well as the Hindu doctrine, that one should know their self, in order to be able to be enlightened, and that you must detach yourself from any type of materialistic desire. So I kind of thought that was interesting as well, being that is kind of the message that is conveyed in the film, which I'll get into later. Now, just to add in there, the story was revived after Madame Gabrielle passed away. It was revived by an individual named Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont. Like I say, I'm probably slaughtering these names. She was also from France. And what's kind of interesting is that when she wrote the additional version, she really didn't give credit to Madame Gabrielle. And that was just a point to bring out. But what's funny is that even though she didn't give credit to her, her actual rendition is the most commonly known version, and people attribute the story of Beauty and the Beast to Jean Marie. Now, she was one of the first to include folk tales as moralist and educational tools in her writings. And like I said, the original movie was in 1991, and a subsequent film just happened in, this year. And here are some sources in case you want to check that information out. Okay, so it's time to get into the actual material of this presentation and how the film and the story relates to, esotericism. And these are the three concepts I want to kind of elaborate on through the rest of the presentation. And one is the feminine energy, and all of these examples are actual things that are esoteric in nature, that's kind of aside from the mainstream religious doctrine that is not gotten into in that sector. But like I said, one is dealing with the feminine energy, which is conceptualized in the character of Belle, and then you have the ego or former self demonstrated in Gaston, and the prince prior to having the spell put on him. And if you recall, Gaston is kind of the one that's going around trying to marry Belle, and he's real egotistical, boastful, and brags a lot. And then the third concept I want to get into is the death and resurrection concept that's shown in the film. So starting off with the aspects of the feminine energy, just to sort of describe that, is a real heavy concept in esotericism, as far as not actually gender specific, but the energy that's kind of associated with feminine aspects or properties. And what most people don't know is that this was the original cosmic force of worship by our ancestors. They had more sense to know that man or a man couldn't actually spawn life, or create what we call the universe, or whatsoever. Later on, when the masculine properties came forth out of religion, they tried hard to suppress the feminine energy, and that's how now we accredit religion or the creator to a male. When most African based belief systems, they worship and recognize the feminine principle, and they had a lot of fertility cults in order to recognize that, because what the ancestors believe is that that which is above is below. So let's take, for example, the Egyptians. They knew that the creative force was feminine in nature, so they kind of conceptualized that, or anthropomorphized that in the goddess Hathor. And then you have other civilizations, such as Babylon, who had the creative goddess Tiamat, and also Isis, who gave birth to Horus. So a lot of our ancestors recognize that the feminine energy is that which spawns, creativity and life. And most of the aspects that are attributed to the feminine energy, scientifically is exhibited in right brain functionality. So any traits or characteristics such as intuition, being into music, a love for music, art, having multi-dimensional thinking, fantasy oriented, and numerous other examples are attributed to the feminine energy. And basically what this has to do with the film is that these are all characteristics of Belle. If you watch the movie, whether old or new, you can see that she was self-taught. She loved to read. She tried to kind of teach the children in the village to read. She didn't follow societal norms. She was seen as a radical and an outcast. She was pushing for change. One particularly being that, not having to get married or being forced to marry someone that you weren't actually in love with. And she was also kind of childlike in nature. Now, not childlike in, and for lack of better words, ignorant per se, but childlike in that she was free and innocent, and didn't, want any kind of, holds or bonds on her. So that kind of gets it to the feminine energy, which I said is presenting a lot of your esoteric, knowledge, and that most of our ancestors kind of recognized prior to, religious indoctrination, which kind of pushed the male forward, as the creator or the first one, to be manifest. So the next concept that I derived from the movie was that of ego, um, which a lot of your spirituality based systems and mystery schools deal in. And what the ego is a false representation of self. It kind of blinds out the purpose of the soul and strays the soul away from the original source. So you don't only begin to think that you're individual, but you start to believe that you're a part from the original source or creator, or what some may call God. And this is what religion kind of does. Kind of separates you from being one, or you think you have to go through another individual to get back to the source. But the ego is definitely shown in it throughout the movie. Just the whole imagery of the beast represents ego, something bigger and something more defiant than what actually is on the inside. Because actually the prince was void of ego as a child, but he grew into it when his mother died, because he lost that feminine side of him. It wasn't actually implemented into him, or he didn't get the full advantage of having the feminine aspect in his life. As the movie stated, he was taken under his father's wing, who eventually made him like him. So we can just imagine how his father was if the prince turned out to be like he did. And what I found interesting was that Gaston, even though he's a separate character in the movie, actually represents the outward manifestation or former self of the prince, because he is actually fighting against his own self or ego. Like I stated earlier, Gaston, was the egotistical maniac in the movie, just bragging all the time and boastful, just self-oriented or oriented. He thought everybody wanted him. He tried to force himself on Belle. He was the strongest, he was the most honorable, building up all these defenses, like the ego does, in order to, secure actual insecurity. So like I said, even though Gaston was a separate character, I actually saw him as the beast having to fight against his own ego, and eventually having to beat him in order to rise or enlighten himself. And like I said, the form of the beast represented the ego, because as the characters who stayed in the castle with the beast, they told Belle at one point that the prince, in his behaviors towards her, he was only acting on instinct and not his actual true inner self. So he was just acting out based on the ego or trying to cover up his insecurity. Okay, now I know a lot of you are looking at this and saying, what in the hell is this guy showing? Specifically with the picture on the top left. Most of us associate this image, with evil or the devil or Satan. But I would just have to ask, where did your understanding of this imagery come from? Did it come from an actual understanding and research of the image and what it means? Or was it a sort of programming based on any media you may have seen or what you may have heard from another individual? And that's kind of another central point in esotericism. Like I said, as far as the Jesuits were concerned as well, is to do one's own research and to look within oneself and not always to go with, hearsay or what someone says. So when you start to, understand this concept, you start to see that a lot of symbols and messages, in society were actually mistranslated over time and now are presented totally opposite of what they originally were, such as this image of Baphomet. And this image is an ancient symbol, mostly used by ancestors and especially the, Black Moors in Europe. It was a symbol of kind of duality, a universal symbol. So as you can see, it represented good, evil, male and female, based on the different parts it has. And like I said earlier, a lot of our ancestors were involved in fertility cults, worshiping that female aspect of creation. And as you can see, it's sort of similar in imagery, to the uterus of a woman, which gives life. And like I said, the image of Baphomet, can be conceived as representing duality, life and death. And as you can see, the uterus is that organ which gives life, or life comes through, or the soul manifests on the spiritual, physical plane. And what I also found interesting is that this image of Baphomet is actually similar to the image of the beast. But like I said, what it could represent is only half of what the actual image is supposed to be. Of course, the beast, whatever he was supposed to be, he definitely wasn't a goat. But as far as the horns, and the look, it kind of represents just that one side, that impartial nature, until he met Bel. So eventually throughout the movie, after the beast kind of, meets Bel and, kind of gains a liking towards her, and eventually towards the end of the movie falls in love with her, it kind of shows the whole duality concept as well, is that, the one half is kind of incomplete without the other half in esoteric terms. So like I said, the male and feminine properties, they can have certain characteristics, to them, but in order to, represent a full thing, they have to be united, the male and feminine properties. And what I found interesting, or what I remembered, is when reading the Gospel of Thomas, which is a book or a writing that's not actually in the Bible. It was actually found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945, buried in the sands. And this book, along with many other books, were buried by the individuals you call the Gnostics, who were kind of your pre-Christians or descendants out of the Egyptian mystery schools. And their writings were suppressed because the church considered them heresy, or against the mainstream beliefs that were trying to be pushed. So most of the books were burned and discarded, and the Gnostics hunted down and killed. But this specific book, the Gospel of Thomas, was found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. And just recalling what I read in there, it kind of is similar in nature to the message that's being conveyed in Beauty and the Beast. So just to kind of go over it here, I'm just going to read it. And also what I'll add is that most of the Gospel of Thomas is said to include the true sayings of Jesus. Now, my personal opinion, through my research, there was no actual historical figure, by the name of Jesus, or any individual, consistent with those characteristics that are given to that person. What it is actually, probably some type of, Gnostic or Egyptian priest who put these sayings together, but then later on they were attributed, to Jesus. But it says, Jesus saw infants being suckled. He said to his disciples, "These infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom." They said to him, which are the disciples, "Shall we then as children enter the kingdom?" Jesus said to them, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and female one and the same, so that the male not be male, nor the female female, and when you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then you will enter the kingdom." Now, basically, to the uninitiated, that would sound like some kind of, ridiculous riddle. But once you get to the core of it, it's kind of talking about that dual nature, and not separating, anything, as far as being one. So like I said earlier, the male and feminine principles is that which is supposed to be cohesive and act together. And the movie kind of conveys that, based on a separation. Like I said earlier, the beast kind of, or the prince kind of lost his feminine, aspect, or, right-sided brain function, based on when his mother died, and he became bitter, and non-compassionate. But like I said, eventually when he met Belle, that's when he began to awaken. And like it says here, then you will enter the kingdom, and not an actual kingdom or like heaven, but what most esoteric individuals will tell you is in an enlightenment phase. The kingdom or heaven is within you, and it is up to you to ascend to that level. You can experience heaven on a regular basis, or you can experience hell on an everyday basis, based on the mentality you decide to set for yourself each day. And that's kind of what the beast was dealing with, kind of living in the hell, waiting to die, because he was void of that feminine aspect. Now, what's also interesting is that the story of Beauty and the Beast coincides with the Dogon mysteries as well. And if you don't know anything about the Dogon, these are individuals who live in West Mali, Africa, if I'm not mistaken. And they had advanced knowledge about the stars in the universe prior to any telescopes or any technological advancements that could allow them to know the inner workings of the universe, were even invented. So these people were, found and interviewed, I believe, by two French anthropologists. I have the book, and it's called the Pale Fox, and it kind of goes into depth about their belief system. But they kind of questioned these individuals, and they told them about the Sirius star system, and how it orbits another star, and how their ancestors came from that star system to Earth and gave them the knowledge. Now, me truthfully, upon research, I definitely believe these individuals, were given knowledge by an advanced civilization, because, like I said, the knowledge that they had was later confirmed, upon the creation of telescopes and, technology that could confirm that there was a star of the capacity that they explained that was being orbited by another star. But basically, their creator God, in the story of the pale fox or Ogo, is kind of similar in nature to Beauty and the Beast as well. So just to kind of go over it here, when Amma, the creator God, fashioned the Nomo, he insulated them for a period of gestation with the male and female counterparts. One Nomo, called Ogo or the pale fox, became impatient and broke from Amma's womb early without his female counterpart. He thus tried to become like Amma, but could only succumb to a violent, destructive existence, which I put in there kind of left brain, always searching for his female counterpart, but he's always doomed to be incomplete. Like I said, that is definitely similar in nature to what's happening with the beast, having to find his female counterpart in order to break free from the spell. And the spell is actually, in my opinion, kind of having an individual nature, not having that female aspect, sort of behaviors that you see with a calcified pineal gland, not being in tune spiritually, and practicing those higher emotions. And also what you see in the story is that it's kind of similar to the fall of Lucifer, as well. But I guess that's for another lecture. Now, the last concept I want to get into, in the film, is that of resurrection. So of course, towards the end of the movie, just when kind of Belle exclaims her love for the beast, he's died and he's kind of laying there. But then what happens is that he's resurrected. There's a physical death, but it didn't actually represent, uh, actual death, as far as dying of the body. But the beast, like I said earlier, was kind of the outward appearance, that was covering up the inner self of the prince. So it representing a shedding of the ego or the beast, him rising from a primitive state and reaching spiritual enlightenment, being that he found his feminine counterpart or awakened, to his higher emotions. He kind of let go of the beast. And this is also a concept presented a lot of esoteric material, as far as man, being beastly in nature, but having an advantage over the rest of the animal world, because he has the ability to enlighten and raise himself up to a godlike individual. And that was a powerful concept in the movie, that most people probably missed. And that's also a concept, in Hinduism and Christianity, as far as the resurrection concept. So throughout the movie, the whole, spell on the beast was kind of, and when it would end and be broken, or remain on him, like they said, if he was unable to break the spell, he would remain a beast or in his primitive state or lower state, for the rest of his life. And not beast as far as the image that was portrayed in the movie, but as he had succumbed to that level of an existence, during his adulthood, and eventually, caused him to have a curse on him, a beast in that manner, not thinking with high intellect, or spirit. So the significance of the rose, which I found interesting, and this is an excerpt taken from a website. It says, just as the rose consists of many petals held together, so the person who attains to the unfoldment of the soul begins to show many different qualities. If you could remember, um, you know, a beast is supposed to represent something of ignorance, something in a primitive state, but as Belle was unable to unfold some of the layers of the beast back, she saw that he was pretty much of an intellectual, caring, and compassionate person. He had a vast literary knowledge base. He represented the qualities of a gentleman by being able to dance, but those qualities had to be peeled back or uncovered underneath the ego or the beast. And to continue, the qualities emit fragrance in the form of a spiritual personality. The rose has a beautiful structure, and the personality, which proves the unfoldment of the soul, has also a fine structure and manner in dealing with others, in speech and action. The atmosphere of a spiritual being pervades the air like the perfume of a rose. This was taken from an online website by Avalon Mystery School. So as you can see, as the rose kept, the rose wasn't actually dying, in my opinion. As you can see, the petals were falling off, every so often. And I think that kind of represented his, stages of enlightenment, or coming into his feminine side as far as meeting Belle. And as the rose eventually, withered and had no more petals on it, it kind of exposed the inner self, which allowed him to awaken, as a higher being. And this kind of coincides, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is a theory of psychology proposed by Adam Maslow in 1943, and a theory of human motivation. So what he kind of conceptualized, was the stages that man goes through, in his life, or different times. And it starts at the very basic level here. As you can see in red, the first stage is a survival stage, which is the lowest of stages that man can be in. The physiological represents, the need for food, water, sex, just your very minimal basic needs of, beastly nature. And then it transcends into a safety aspect, and then wanting to have love and belonging, and then esteem, and then the highest of the pyramid or need is self-actualization, when you don't associate yourself with what the world wants you to be. You actually look into the soul and kind of look for your higher purpose, and look for the God within you. And these are all interestingly concepts that are shown throughout the movie, as far as the beast starting on the lowest of levels and then reaching that higher level. So based on the movie, we can kind of gain a perceived Trinitarian concept, which I kind of came up with. And the Trinity is kind of a high concept, especially in Christianity, but it doesn't represent the Trinity as far as they try to push to us, but the Trinity as far as past, present, and future. The past being reflective of the former self, that which you used to be, that which you're trying to shed on a regular basis through attainment or not of knowledge, or in the aspect of the beast, trying to find that feminine counterpart, or awaken that spirituality or enlightenment phase. Then you have the present, which is suffering in order to shed the former self. So just because you decide, that you want to rise from a beastly nature, usually there's some suffering, that has to happen in order for you to, reach a higher state of consciousness. This is shown throughout your, with Buddha, who struggled and went through pain and despair, and eventually wanted to rid himself of that, which is also shown with the beast. There were times he gave up hope, especially when he was on the cliff fighting Gaston. It seems at times that he lost, or that, like I said, Gaston, who actually represented his ego, had the upper hand on him. But he eventually didn't succumb to that. Or what happened that was that Gaston didn't actually, the beast didn't actually kill Gaston. Gaston has such a big ego that he actually kind of caused his own self-destruction, which is relative to us on a regular basis. The ego is so flamboyant and power driven, that it kind of, leads itself to its own destruction, which a lot of people deal with on a regular basis. But then you have the future, which represents the spiritual self via enlightenment. So in summary, I hope this presentation kind of, allow for a deeper understanding, of esotericism. And like I said, the information and messages that are conveyed, in these writings, such as Beauty and the Beast, and that we read as children, but we don't actually interpret it, in such a way. Now, whether these individuals were thinking on the same level as me, I wouldn't definitely say yes. But like I said, based on the information I did find, I think there were, hidden meanings, in the storyline, and definitely in the movie with the imagery. So like I said, I hope that information was of some interest to you. And if you want to check out any of this information, you can refer back to the sources or the reference page I have here. But thanks for listening, and peace.